latest figures suggest that we have largely passed the peak of the third wave of infections, although there are areas in the country where we still need to be concerned because the rates of infections have not yet shown signs of decline.
And for that reason, based on the advice experts gave them, Cabinet decided yesterday to move the country from adjusted level 4 to adjusted level 3. But do we now drop our guard again, like we did after the second wave, resulting in the country being ill-prepared for the third wave? Well, just how prepared is our country for a November-December fourth wave that some have already predicted? We speak to the National Department about that, but also about vaccination and more. But not before our panel takes a nuanced look at some of the key political questions President Cyril Ramaphosa's speech last night threw up. The Watchdog starts now. Not only are we dealing with the coronavirus pandemic, we're also dealing with another pandemic which has resulted in a big issue for the government, and that is what to do with those people who are responsible for the chaos, the violence, the intimidation, and everything that went with the looting. What do we do with those people? That's the question President Cyril Ramaphosa tried to answer yesterday. And our panel is going to look at whether what he told us does indeed reassure all of us that even on that front, not only on the pandemic, but on the looting and the violence that came with it, we are safe as a nation. Take a listen to what the president had to say about what they are doing to deal with the question of the looting, the violence, and the intimidation that came with it.
The latest figures suggest that we have largely passed the peak of the third wave of infections, although there are areas in the country where we still need to be concerned because the rates of infections have not yet shown signs of decline.
Okay, we'll try and find that bite for you. Let me introduce you to our panelists for this evening. We have Professor Tinyiko Maluleke and Asanda Mwashen. Good evening to both of you, and thank you so much for agreeing to come through. Perhaps I should start by asking each one of you, starting with you, Prof, just what you made of the President's comments around specifically the issue of security and the state's ability or inability to really deal with the issues there the way many of us thought we had a capability of doing, until, of course, we were caught napping, as it were, and ministers had to contradict themselves, but not only them, but their boss as well, having to admit last night that the state law enforcement agencies didn't really deal with the chaos the way they could have done. Prof?
Yes, he of course admitted that. It wasn't for the first time yesterday that he admitted to the slowness of the security forces. So it's an old admission because it's now nearly a week old, nearly 2 weeks old. What he didn't say, though, was to comment on the disarray, the seeming disarray within government and between ministers. He chose to steer away from that. And I thought it was a lost opportunity because perhaps citizens do want some reassurance from the president on occasion as last night to say, look, there were a little bit of miscommunication from different departments. Don't worry about it. This is why it happened. Or this is what we are going to do about it. So that was not forthcoming. But there was a bit of still in it when he spoke about the determination of government to make sure that people are brought to book and that government was not going to rest until that is done. So that was very strong message coming from him. But the details were not there. But I think it was better than nothing. The worst area of performance was his non-comment on the recent miscommunication between departments and even ministers sounding like they were at loggerheads with one another. One of them even contradicting him, even though she later changed her tune.
Should we be settling for less, though, Prof, and say, it was better than nothing? Is that what we've become?
Well, population adjusts to the quality of their leaders, unfortunately. And we have been adjusting downwards for some time now in this country. And the recent events have forced us to adjust downwards even further. But we ought not to. We ought to continue to demand of government to be accountable. The events of the past 10 days or the past 2 weeks are certainly a scandal, because it is as if government had just disappeared for a while. But, the poor could argue that government has disappeared on them for a while longer. So accountability is something we must continue to demand, and I think accountability is what the president should demand from members of his cabinet, especially on a national crisis such as this. 300 lives and more have been lost, not to speak about the commercial and business losses that South Africans have suffered.
Asanda Ngosheng, your thoughts. Why do you think the president couldn't or didn't say as much as most, if not all of us, thought he actually would on an occasion like that, especially his speech, taking place after a fact-finding mission that he was on. He went to KZN, visited the places that were affected by that violence, had conversations with his own ministers about what happened and what didn't happen. One would have thought that at the first opportunity of addressing the nation, we would have gotten a lot more than what we actually got last night.
Yeah, I think that South Africa is in a very sad place because I don't know what we've done to deserve the kind of government that we have. I don't know what we've done to deserve this kind of paralysis and inaction, because I think that the minister should have by now fired literally all of the leaders of the security cluster, because they all deserve to be fired for failure to do their jobs. As I've said before, we knew the day when Jacob Zuma was basically refusing to be arrested that something was going to happen should he get arrested. And so they should have been prepared, and they were warned by Jacob Zuma's supporters. This was not a surprise. So first of all, they failed us. And then secondly, after they failed us, they go, and as Prof. Tinyiko has already said, they go and they then contradict each other and have different versions of what actually happened. And I think in particular, the KZN premier deserves to be fired, and so does the eThekwini mayor, because for most of the duration of the violence in KZN, they were reaffirming their support for Jacob Zuma. And I think that, if we really are serious as a country about the rule of law, if we really are serious as a country about ensuring that South Africans can feel safe and South Africans can feel like there is accountability for any and all actions, we need to see some heads roll from the top. Because what we're seeing currently is the government, as usual, is going to poor people and basically infringing on their very human rights by just going into people's houses and grabbing any and everything that they can because people don't have receipts, knowing that we are in a socio-economic state where people are hungry, where people are barely able to afford food. And so what you're doing is you're going to informal settlements in particular, and you're targeting them for lawlessness, and you are criminalizing the poor. While you are leaving, we've seen CEOs of very big fund management companies who have been embroiled in this. Why are they not going to suburbs if that's how we do law enforcement in South Africa? Why are they not going to areas where it's not just black working class people who live there to go and recuperate the looting? And in fact, I'm actually at a point where I'm wondering how the ANC can even stand, and the government of the ANC can even stand with a straight face and condemn looting when they have been looting our coffers for many, many years. And this is why they're unable to actually take decisive action, because all of them are a bunch of, I don't even know if I should even be using the kind of language I'm tempted to use on national television, but they really don't care about us. They are morally corrupt. That is the status that I have reached about our government. They are morally corrupt because no person who has any semblance of moral values can watch the situation that happened in KZN and still stay with the lack of inaction that we are seeing, and still stay with the lack of consequences that we are seeing for people who practically dethroned what was one of the most stable political governments in this continent.
So you reckon they are going for soft targets, so to speak?
Yes, of course. They're going for soft targets because they need numbers. They need to show us that they've arrested people. And so if you go to poor working class people who don't have lawyers that are going to sue you the minute you infringe on their human rights, you are obviously going to find those people and you're going to be able to put them in jail. And so let's go after the working poor. Let's criminalize the working poor while we keep, first of all, the people who plotted and planned this, because I don't think that the people who plotted and planned this are just random people. They're people with intimate knowledge of the state. You know, let's leave Jacob Zuma. Why are we leaving Jacob Zuma out of it? I've been asking, why are we not adding 2 charges of treason to Jacob Zuma? Why are we still paying for Jacob Zuma's benefits? Why are Jacob Zuma's children still out of jail when they were very much inciting? And, you know, our cyber criminal laws are not that great, but they are good enough to actually hold somebody accountable for inciting violence on Twitter. And what I'm really even more disappointed by is the response of opposition parties, and in particular people like Julius Malema, who have really, like, I don't even know what's happening at this point in time to the EFF and Julius Malema, and the potential that he had at some stage to be a dissenting voice that sometimes brought sometimes logical arguments. But then again, if you look at who is the ANC and even who is the EFF, or the genesis of the EFF, these are the people that we as people who went to university used to laugh at, who were members of SRC, who used to be so corrupt that all they wanted was to loot the SRC funds and to take the SRC bus, to fill it with girls and to ply them with alcohol and do God knows what. We should not be surprised, I suppose, that this is the state that our country has got to, if these are the kind of people who are in leadership. And we are going to continue to see this until we as South Africans use our vote to actually put in a government that is capable of leading us. Because right now what's happening is that we are being led by the blind, we are being led by the corrupt, and we are being led by the morally reprehensible people that we are seeing at this point in time. Even Cyril Ramaphosa had some hope at some stage, but he has shown that he's just as bad as the rest of the ANC, because silence, complacency, and inaction is just as bad as action.
Well, he put a finger last night on something. I'm not saying the other stuff shouldn't concern us just as much, but which is going to be bad for us, the effect of the violence we have seen over the past couple of weeks, coming as it did on the back of efforts to try and get our economy out of the doldrums. Let's take a listen to just where he thought that the events of the past week are going to take us as well.
The effect of the recent violence on investor confidence is a great threat to our recovery. We are taking steps to strengthen the capacity and preparedness of our security forces to prevent similar incidents in future. This includes responding more quickly and decisively to reports that we are now receiving of extortion by criminal groups as businesses start to rebuild, especially in KwaZulu-Natal. Anyone who threatens or engages in violence will face the full might of the law. While we have acknowledged that our response was too slow, our security forces have demonstrated that they are able to ensure stability and order.
Now, I chose this particular, these few lines because there were so many, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, apparent contradictions here. One, the president is acknowledging that the violence we've seen over the past couple of weeks hurts our efforts to rebuild the economy, because foreign investors will start looking at us as people who are really, not doing the basic things that we're supposed to do. And then a couple of lines below, he then says, there's a problem, including, we are receiving reports of extortion by criminals as businesses start to rebuild. Now, when you say reports of extortion, it suggests to me that you don't have a finger on it. You've just received these reports. You may well be worried or have noted it, but you don't know where this is coming from, which then begins to tell us that you are not going to be able to deal with it or deal effectively with it, even though you are putting a brave face and saying those who are threatening us with violence will face, consequences. I don't know what you made of it, Professor Tinyiko Maluleke, but it got me worried.
Well, I think it should get all of us worried. The problem is that the president is not talking about the genesis of the problem. It's a problem of leadership. So he is blaming everything and everyone except his own government. I mean, to say the government has admitted to being slow in reaction is to insult our intelligence, because how slow can you be? Can you be slow for 3 days, for 4 days, for 5 days? Do you still call that slow reaction? So he tries to reduce this to a security problem, when in fact it's a leadership problem. And one of the things he could have done yesterday would have been to say, Minister so-and-so and Minister and so-and-so have been relieved of their duties because of a failure of leadership. And that's the opportunity that he missed. So he says we get reports, because that's probably all he gets. And he does not really have a handle on what is going on down there, even though all the signs were there, all the telltale signs were there, as my colleague has indicated. We knew what was coming. We were told what was coming. We sat and watched what was going on in Nkandla for a whole week, the shenanigans, the speeches, the threats that were being made there, the non-wearing of masks, and the police were there. So we have a leadership problem. And the sooner the president admits to that and not try to reduce it to other things. So one of the things that he was trying to do with his colleagues is not only this publicity drive of going on expeditions to go and check out what went on in order to pacify us. They also tried to distract us by starting a new conversation about insurrection versus whatever else. So we stopped worrying about this, and now we start chasing the word insurrection or not insurrection. And all of this, for me, is because of a refusal to admit a problem of leadership. And as long as President does not address that, it means that he too has a problem of leadership. It is not in charge any more than his government is in charge.
Asanda, is this not Mr. Long Game's way, of doing things? Perhaps we're not giving him the benefit of a doubt. And perhaps with a lot of talk around, a need for a cabinet reshuffle, he thought, maybe I'll deal with this question differently. And that's the direction that he's going to take. He will deal with this matter by reshuffling his cabinet. You don't want to give him the benefit of a doubt?
There is no benefit left to my mind, because by the time he acts, there will be no country left for him to act on. If you have criminals already now threatening the rebuild of what is the third largest economy of the country, really, these people can't even arrest known instigators, and now they are going to struggle to arrest known extortionists in Durban. Come on. This is really, as I've said, the lowest that South Africa can possibly get. I can't believe personally that we are actually in this position where we are being held hostage by an ANC that has 1.4 million members in a country of 55 million plus people, an ANC that only got 10 million votes in a country of possible almost 30 million votes. We cannot allow the situation as South Africans to continue. We need to go out and vote. And even if we all vote for many small parties and we have to have a government of national unity, trust me, this is better than where we are, because right now the ANC is a government of national unity. It can't even decide when there was treason, if it was treason or not, if it was insurrection, if it was whatever it was, because they're not seeing eye to eye. And we can't afford as a country to wait until the ANC decides whether it's going to break up and become two parties or it's going to continue as this church of different opinions, as they like to call themselves. We do not have that luxury. We are a country in crisis. We are already at junk status. I don't even know how much further we need to sink economically. And he's worried about foreign investors. Mr. President, worry about your local investors. Because if I am a business person who is in Durban right now, having been looted and now facing criminals, when I try and set up, I am not going to set up that business. And that is what we should be worried about. We already have a country that has been decimated economically by COVID. We have a country that has been decimated in terms of socio-economic conditions by COVID. Our psyche has been decimated by COVID because there's so many deaths happening, and death is literally surrounding all of us. And this is the last thing that we need. And over and above the violence that we've seen, over and above the re-traumatization of 90s style, Zulu warrior style, tribalism, over and above that, we now are sitting with a Cape Town that has 82 people counting who have been dead, killed because of a taxi war that this very government has also failed to stop. People in Cape Town for 3 weeks have practically been held hostage. Working class people, even middle class people, people who do not have cars cannot get to work. And those who have cars are not able to drive their cars in the township because taxi drivers are pulling them out. Taxi drivers are shooting at them. And if they see you with colleagues going to work in a group, that's a problem. Brazil, this has happened there. We know what happens in countries where these kind of things are allowed. This is a Cape Town, for example, that already was having, just the other day, 20 plus people died because of extortion wars. So you've got Cape Town, it's extortion wars, it's taxi violence. You've got Durban, KZN, that now has criminal gangs who can't even allow the rebuilding. You've got Gauteng, which is still struggling to figure itself out after this looting. You've got Limpopo, which is just starting to recover from the looting of Julius Malema and his cronies and friends, who still have not even seen a day in jail for that looting, by the way. You've got an Eastern Cape which has hunger, malnutrition, and lack of water in more and more municipalities. This is the country that we are living in. And these people that were voted in by the so-called minority of a majority are failing to lead at every single point that you can look at. Right now, if we had to score our government, I'd give them a 10, if not a 0. We need to do better. We deserve better leadership. People died for this democracy. People died for this country to be where it is. We cannot allow these criminals to continue to loot our state and continue to allow other criminals to come in and enjoy the spoils in the name of so-called democracy.
Professor Maluleke, towards the end of his speech, the president felt the need to make the point that our constitutional order has stood firm. Now, one can only deduce that he was saying that because of what we've seen coming out of the courts, how the courts have really dealt, with the criminals who have had to appear before them very ruthlessly. Do you get a sense that maybe increasingly, the more the courts do their job, the executive and the legislature, on the other hand, don't feel the need to push as hard, even though, these are the three arms of the state that should be working, in unison to protect our democracy. Yes, we know our history. They have failed us, the legislature and the executive, that is, numerous times before. But we had thought that, the tide had turned. But the more you listen to the speeches, like the one of last night, the more you get a sense that the executive and the legislature, aren't as vigilant and as the judiciary is in this instance. Your thoughts?
Yes, Vuyo. My sense is that the judiciary is doing its job, but I get more and more the sense that they are doing the job of government.
Exactly.
Because many of the things that end up at the courts are things that could have and should have been solved long before they became problematic within the party. So how does a party allow someone like Jacob Zuma to make so many mistakes, mistake after mistake after mistake? Now go back to the arms deal, go back to all the other allegations that he has had to face. How many times were the parliamentarians defending him from a vote of no confidence in parliament? So he ends up one day in front of the judges simply because his own political party was unable to rein him in and to show him where he was making mistakes. So I'm afraid that the courts have become a second government, a B team, if you like, and maybe even the A team of government. And let's not forget, the latest campaign of Jacob Zuma was to insult the courts, to put them out in bad repute, and to say that we don't have a constitutional order, that all the judges are up to nothing. And he was trying to instigate a national uprising against the judicial system. That's what he was trying to do, and that's why he is in jail today. So it's not as if the courts are completely free or will forever be free from the spillage, from this dirty war that is going on within the ruling party. It may spill over to the judiciary if it hasn't done so already. And we must just be thankful that they've stood up to Jacob Zuma and put him in jail now. But who knows what will happen next? Because Jacob Zuma is just an individual. There are many Jacob Zumas inside the ANC. He's not alone.
Asanda, we've been listening since last night and this morning. A lot of cynics saying the executive is happy to, abandon its role where it matters, where things are within their means, to actually correct the wrongs that we continue to see. But where it's about serving them as politicians, they will stop at nothing. And one of the things that people have been, or the cynics I call them, have been raising over the past 24 hours has been how quick it was for cabinet to find money where before they said there was none, to be able to support destitute people, poor, hungry people who need the money, no doubt. But only a few days ago, they were saying this was difficult, if not impossible, to do. But they have now managed to somehow find the money, and the 350 Rand grant is going to be extended to about February next year. Should we be that harsh when it comes to that? But also the fact that the president stepped forward as well to say, well, even uninsured businesses who have suffered as a result of what we saw over the past couple of weeks will be taken care of by SASRIA. Should we really be cynical about this?
I think that we are in a dire situation. So there's a saying that, if you put a frog in boiling water, it's going to jump out immediately because it's going to realize that the situation is going to kill it. As South Africans, we are in the opposite situation, which is if you put a frog and then you pour water and then you switch on the kettle, by the time the frog realizes that the water is boiling hot, the frog itself will be boiling. South Africa is that boiling frog. We are at boiling point and we're going to self-combust at any stage. And one of the reasons for that is because we don't have leadership. And we continue to put into place people who have consistently shown us that they lack the kind of leadership that is required to run a complex country like South Africa. How do you? So let me make this clear. I am a big supporter of the big income grant, and I think they should have extended it all the way up until February or even later, and we should be looking into it. But you can't be a country where there are more people every year who are on a social welfare system. You can't, it tells you that the economy is not working, right? If a large number, almost even the majority of your citizens are on some kind of social assistance, there is no economy that is healthy that can withstand a majority on social welfare, because you need people to actually create that money through the tax system in order for you to be able to finance that. What we are going to see in the future, because we are allowing these situations, is potentially revolts to increase the social grant while the tax base is decreasing. How are we going to handle those things if we make irresponsible decisions that show that all you have to do technically is to riot and you might just get another grant? included into the financial packages. And so there's a sense in which you can implement social welfare for people, you can have social safety for people, but you can't do it in such a way that it is right now, which is, it's unsustainable. The high levels of unemployment, I don't think we should even be calling it high levels of unemployment. It's like South African jobs are now the lotto. You're lucky if you have a job. It's like the scratch card. That is the country that we live in. And you cannot have a country being sustained by that, because inequality is one of the biggest indicators for coming violence. And what we have in this country and what we continue to create and what we continue to replicate is an unsustainable system that is based only on whether the ANC wants to win the next election or not, based only on how much money the ANC think they can then steal from us as South African citizens through the vote, through the authority that they get in the ballot. And I think that this is a situation where the social contract is wearing very thin, because people allow you to govern. And once people are done with allowing you to govern, it's impossible, almost impossible, to come back from that situation. Ask any country on the African continent, and they will tell you that they didn't realize things were turning until it was too late. I'm saying South Africans, wake up right now. We are at boiling point, and we need to decide if we're going to jump out of the boiling water, if we're going to throw the boiling water out, or if we're going to decide on a different kind of leadership that can actually lead this country and lead this resource-rich. Our country is not poor, by the way. It's a resource-rich country. We are not short of money. We are not short of funding. What we are short of is leadership. What we are short of is vision. And what we are short of is moral authority. Our government is morally corrupt and corruptible. And because of this, we are not going to go anywhere as a country. And we're going to end up constantly being in the state of crisis that is never ending. Just like we thought when load shedding started that it was going to be a temporary thing, look where we are now.
Professor Maluleke, last words from you?
Well, we are in serious trouble as a country. You will have seen that over the weekend I wrote a short opinion piece where I suggested that the liberation movement is dead, or we will have a funeral for it soon. And that means that we have to start thinking about alternatives. This idea that we will be saved by one political party, that we will be saved by one messianic leader, whether the name of that leader is Ramaphosa, Julius Malema, or Jacob Zuma. That idea that we are going to outsource our agency as citizens to this or that party is one that we must give up on. I also think that the 20 million South Africans who did not vote last time, I also wrote an article where I said the 20 million that got away after the last elections. Someone needs to start approaching that 20 million because they are the sleeping giant. They are the people who can turn things around. But they've given up. So there are two ways in which this thing can pan out. South Africans can give up on politics completely and stop voting and stop participating. Just give up on government, like it has happened in many African countries. People don't factor government into their lives at all. They just get on with it. They do what they can. They don't do what they can't. But government is no longer a factor in their lives. And I hope that we don't go that route, but that we actually kick out a government that is leaderless, that is visionless, that leeches on the South African taxpayer. So these grants that have now been reinstated, great. But we also know that this is how ANC gets voted in. It's not innocent. It's not largesse. It's not government largesse. It's our money, by the way, that is being used here, but at a time when it suits the ruling party for purposes which are very narrow and for purposes of creating permanent dependency out of South Africans who are quite capable of working for themselves and restoring their own dignity. So I think we must give up on outsourcing our agency. We must throw away the idea of a messiah, even if that messiah is a political party. And maybe political parties of the liberation type in this country have run their course and they have reached their expiry date.
And that's where we're going to leave it. Thanks to both of you, Professor Tinyiko Maluleke and Asanda Ngwasheng, taking a nuanced look at some of the key political questions that were thrown up by President Cyril Ramaphosa's speech last night. After the break, the Department of Health talks to us about its preparedness for a predicted fourth wave. Don't go away. Well, based on decreasing numbers of people infected by the coronavirus, the government yesterday, based on the advice experts gave them, decided to move the country from adjusted level 4 to adjusted level 3. But do we now drop our guard again, like we did after the second wave, resulting in the country being ill-prepared for the third wave? Just how prepared is the country for a November-December fourth wave that some have already predicted? Well, to help us answer those questions, we're now joined by the Deputy Director General of the National Department of Health, Dr. Nicholas Crisp. Good evening, Dr. Crisp. Thanks very much for your time this evening.
Good evening, Boy, and good evening to your viewers.
Now, of course, you know, the adjustments from level 4 to level 3 doesn't mean we are now in a good space, does it?
No, indeed. I think we're going to need to be vigilant for a long time to come, and we need to learn to live with the virus now. We know that this virus mutates. We know that for now, the Delta variant that we've been experiencing is on the decline, but that does not mean it won't still get at us, and it doesn't mean there won't be other variants. So we need to be incredibly vigilant, and we need to get as much of the population vaccinated as we possibly can and as fast as possible.
Now, I was watching earlier a colleague of ours, Sherwin Bryce Pease, had a piece he filed from the United States where he is based. And reading also Time magazine, one could see that even though the United States has vaccinated almost 50% of its population, it does look like the fourth wave is a certainty. Now, if you contrast that with our own numbers, where our vaccination rate is very, very low, does it necessarily mean that there's no hope for us?
Well, no, there's never no hope. I think, we obviously battled to get started, and I think everybody's been very critical about that. But in the last couple of months, we have vaccinated. We're now sitting at 6.6 million people in the population vaccinated, so it's well over 10%. And we are vaccinating in the order of 250,000 people every day. So that's 1 million people every 4 days. This is significantly better than we were just the other day. And we need to pick up. We've been challenged by the president to vaccinate at 300,000 a day. And so our target at the moment is to get to 1 million vaccinations every 3 days. We're in meetings every day with provincial administrations and with the private sector practitioners and a number of other players. And we know that it's possible. We know we have the capacity on the ground. And so now we are dependent on a strategy that gets us sufficient vaccines for a sustainable time with a sufficient demand, which we are now creating by opening up the age groups and making it less complicated for people to get to vaccination sites. And by increasing both the number and the capacity of each of the vaccination sites with some outreach and other particular programs to reach people and to get them vaccinated. So it's a multi-pronged approach of many moving parts and things that are happening, but fortunately it is gearing up very fast.
Now, if we take the nudging by the president or the targets that he has set for you, what you're seeing on the ground and the capacity you've been able to build over the past few weeks, let's say month or so, do your numbers then add up? In other words, can you then say without any fear of contradiction that by the time we get to a stage where, we are close to that prediction of a fourth wave, November, December, we would have vaccinated most people to a point where they will not be, or whatever happens, won't put a strain on the health system? Are you able to say that?
Yeah, look, I
Boldly
don't
and
think
confidently?
nobody is able to say that because we don't know what the next variant will do and whether the immunity that we've created will be sufficient for everything. But certainly that's what we do with the information we have at the moment. So are we able to vaccinate 35 million people by the end of the year and 45 million people by the end of the first quarter of next year? Yes, we are. We do have the vaccines on order, and we have now established a pipeline of vaccine deliveries that if it stays the way that it is starting to unfold, and from next week we're starting to see regular deliveries, which is very nice. Do we have the capability of doing that? Yes, we do. And we are confident from all the meetings we're having with all the service delivery partners that it is definitely sustainable to get to that level. The challenge, of course, is that the vaccines we're using at the moment, we know are effective against the Delta variant. And the problem will be if we deal with a different variant that isn't as well managed as the Delta is with these vaccines at our disposal. So it's not to say we won't get a fourth wave and even a fifth and a sixth wave in due course, but what one's trying to do is get ahead of the epidemic and the rollout by being as quick as possible to get sufficient numbers of people that we get herd immunity.
Dr. Crisper, I want to play a clip from a conversation I had with the co-chairperson of the Interministerial Committee last week, when I asked, because we all knew, a third wave had been predicted, but when it hit us, we were obviously not ready. And I asked her that question as someone who had been attending these meetings, who had been part of these conversations since the pandemic first hit us. What were the responses, when questions had to be, and she says, were asked about why we were not ready, even though the state we were in at the time had actually been predicted. Take a listen to what she had to say to us last week on Thursday.
We could see that we were going to get to the third wave because, all the signs were there. Initially, we did not seem to be prepared. I must say that, because you remember there was a phase where, it was felt that, the hospitals were running short of beds, and we kept saying, where's the plan? Where are where are all the other hospitals that were erupted, the previous during the previous waves? What about staffing? Do we have enough staff? And so really, I think when it hit us and the numbers were quite high, we were really not as prepared as we should have been. As a result, the Provincial Department of Health was really only able to come in, a few days, probably a week into, the high numbers that we were seeing, to say, okay, yes, this is what's going to happen. We then got a full plan. So we really could have done better.
So you're saying, Dr. Chris, will certainly do better this time around?
Well, so you were asking me about vaccination, and I'm telling you we are doing our best to make sure we're vaccinated. Are we ever totally ready for the size of the epidemic or the speed with which each of the waves come at us? I suppose we haven't been. And it's extremely difficult to predict the kind of transmissibility and how fast these waves come. This one came extremely fast. This was a very transmissible variant, and it came extremely much quicker than the previous and higher than the previous waves came. And one can't sustain all that infrastructure all the time. So to gear up again every time you see it coming, there's always a lag time. So I've no doubt we've learned, and that each administration and all the private sector colleagues have learned. But, you can only gear up as fast as you can gear up when it happens. And it's always, nice to have 20/20 hindsight and then to try and use it to plan the next time. But it's, these waves are not as predictable as they look until you actually see the size of the graph that is growing.
But I mean, as you and the experts have been saying over the past a few weeks, in fact, from the time just before the third wave actually hit us, the one good thing was that even though this variant was deadlier, it was responding. I mean, we were responding well to. The vaccines were effective. But part of the problem, which is what I was trying to ask, part of the problem was that for the people who had to end up in hospitals, there was not sufficient or enough resilience there, which became a bit of a problem, and then shortages of supplies of oxygen and so on and so on. And that was the problem. So my point was, have we or are we addressing that before it happens? For those people who may still end up not being vaccinated and therefore, being more affected by whatever a wave may come our way.
Yeah. So look, for the health system, for the country, and for the individual, there's no question prevention is better than cure. And that is really what we try to do. And we try to make sure that there's enough people vaccinated that are in the risk categories. And that's why we started the rollout with 60-plussers and then 50-plussers, because those are the real risk populations. And the more of that population you can vaccinate, the more you can protect them as individuals. But you want to stop transmission, you need to get herd immunity, and then you need to get at least 65%, maybe more, we're not certain with this particular virus, to get transmission, to break transmission within communities. So prevention is always better than cure. You do not want people to even end up in hospital. If they get mild illness and there's some transmission, well, that's tolerable. But to get people to not be so ill that they end up in hospital is the ultimate aim. But when they arrive, you hope that you have, through the protection of the vaccination program and the other non-pharmaceutical interventions, able to slow down the spread and to get as few people as possible ending up in the hospitals. And to predict that size of that wave is very difficult because every variant behaves differently. You can't have the whole health system double its normal capacity sitting waiting the whole time for the next wave to come. But what we do need to do is have rapid response that when we detect that the waves are coming, that we can gear up very quickly. They do catch you a bit unawares when they are so fast. And this third wave happened to, it occurred very, very quickly.
Dr. Chris, we have run out of time. I was going to play a clip from people who are marching in Cape Town today. But I want to ask you about two things that not only that much, but the events of the past couple of weeks have also raised as one. One is the issue of ivermectin, and the other one is these people who do feel that, all these restrictions are unnecessary and people must be given the choice to not vaccinate if they so wish. They are adding to their list of grievances a thing that says that not enough information is being given to the people about options that they have. I know that's a lot to ask to you to respond to in 30 seconds, but yes, that's all I have.
Okay, Vuya, thanks. Now, I'll try and keep it short. So ivermectin, we've seen the reports again in the last week. It's been repeatedly examined. There are a number of committees of various people, medical people who've looked at it. There's no evidence that it makes any difference, and there is evidence that it can cause liver failure, and we have had apparently reported deaths, which still need to be confirmed from ivermectin. No medicine's entirely safe, and one should be careful and not use something that unless it's going to be useful. As far as people's rights are concerned, our country respects people's rights. We try to provide information, make sure people have the facts at their disposal, but we do not force people to get vaccinated. We hope that the colleagues around them will convince them that it is in their own interest and the community interest, but it is not compulsory in this country, and I've never heard anybody on any political or health platform say that we're going to make it compulsory.
And that's where we're going to leave it. Thank you very much for your time and insights this evening, Dr. Nicholas Crisp, who is the Deputy Director General at the National Department of Health. And that's all we had time for this evening. To join us again tomorrow evening at 8 o'clock. From me and the rest of the Watchdog team, have a good night.